Okay, as we start this next module, we're going to actually now look at weather and weather fronts. And here's our essential question. It is, how does the interaction of air masses cause a change in the weather? So really, in this video, I'm just going to talk about what an air mass is and the different types of air masses that affect our weather here in the United States. So this goes along with the same standards we've been working on, S6E for A, B, and C. I'm not going to read those again, but they're there on the screen. So we're going to first look at what causes weather to change. And as you know, you're not taking any notes right now. You will be doing a foldable to go in your notebook at the end, but you won't be doing that as you're watching. You can refer back to this video as much as you need to, though, when you're making that foldable. So what causes the weather to change? What causes us to have sunny skies and by the afternoon we have a thunderstorm, or it's cloudy and drizzly? So something has to happen besides clouds came in and it's raining for that to occur. So we're going to look at the more specifics of it. So in previous lessons, we learned that the movement of air and moisture in the atmosphere causes weather to change. So when that moisture and those clouds move, that causes us to constantly have weather changing, because remember, weather can change drastically from day to day. So we're going to look at what an air mass is, okay? It's a mass of air, right? Okay, it's a large body of air that has the same properties, and properties are characteristics, things about it, that are very similar to the part of the Earth's surface over which that air mass develops. So wherever the air mass forms, it's going to be very similar to that area, okay? So here is a map of North America, and so we're going to look at the different air masses that bring us our weather here in the United States, okay? So you know that this area up here off the coast of Canada and a little below Alaska, that's a cooler air, okay? It's a cool area because it's far from the equator. Its latitude is much higher, and so that's going to be a cool area, okay? And because it's over the ocean, it's going to have a lot of moisture, because any air that's over the ocean is going to have a lot of water vapor in it because it's evaporating. Same thing over here. These are your higher latitudes, far from the equator. And so it's going to be cold and it's going to be moist because it is over the ocean. So an air mass that forms in this area and this area is going to be a cooler air mass full of water vapor, so cool and moist, and that should make sense why it has those characteristics. Okay, so when those air masses move in the directions that the arrows are pointing here, it's going to bring that type of weather. So an air mass that comes from up here is going to bring cooler temperatures and moist air. Same thing over here, okay? But then we have an air mass maybe that's forming up here, okay? It's on land, so it's not going to have a lot of moisture because it doesn't have evaporating water, you know, that has formed as part of it, okay? And it's over Canada, and we know that Canada is pretty far from the equator, so it has a high latitude, so it's going to be cold and it's going to be dry. So pretty much when we talk about air masses, there's two things you're looking for: the temperature of it and the amount of moisture in it. Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it hot or is it cold? And if you just remember those two, then it should be pretty easy. It's wet if it's formed over an ocean, and it's dry if it's forming over land, and it's a warm or hot air mass if it's close to the equator, and it's cold if it's far from the equator. Okay, so this air mass is bringing cold, dry air to the United States. Then we have down here, and this area, we're getting closer to the equator, so the lower latitudes, so you're going to have, this is going to be warm air. A body of air that is warm, and it's moist because it is forming over the ocean, so it's going to have a lot of water vapor in it and a lot of moisture. Same thing over here, warm because it's close to the equator, moist because it is over the ocean, and those bring us warm and moist air. Then we have one more that affects us, and that is one that forms in this Central America area here, and because it's close to the equator, it's going to be warm and hot, and it's dry because it's forming over land. It doesn't have any water to evaporate and make it a moist air mass. Okay, so that moves in. So you see all those air masses are bringing us our weather in the United States. Okay, and so now I'm going to add names to those, and really it's 4 words that you just have to remember. The one that was formed over here, we said it was a cold and it was moist. Okay, humid, remember, means the amount of moisture in the air, amount of water vapor. So the word for cold is polar. So this would be a polar, and that's easy to remember because it's cold. And then the word for moisture is maritime, and that's a word used in sailing. Sailors use that a lot, maritime, so you can remember it means water. Okay, so this air mass right here is called a maritime polar. It's wet and it's cold, so maritime polar, and this is a symbol you'll sometimes see on maps, MP. P capitalized, the M lowercase. Okay, same thing over here. Off the east coast of the United States, it's far from the equator, so it's cold, so that makes it polar. Has a lot of moisture in it because it's forming over the ocean, so it's going to be maritime polar as well. So any air mass that forms over a cold, wet area, like an ocean, it's going to be a maritime polar. Then this one right here that we said was cold, but dry because it's forming over land, we call those continental polar. Continental because it formed over land, which means it's not going to have a lot of moisture, it's going to be dry. Polar because it's cold, and its symbol is CP. So you can see the first letter, which talks about whether it's wet or dry, is always lowercase, and the second letter, which talks about whether it's hot or cold, is going to be your uppercase. And then down here, that one that formed out here closer to the equator, but also in the water, we use the word maritime again because it's wet, it's moist because it formed over the ocean, but now it's going to be hot. So instead of saying polar, because it's cold up here, we're going to say it's tropical. So an air mass that forms over the water close to the equator is going to be maritime tropical, warm and moist. Same thing over here, that forms in the Gulf of Mexico in this area in the Atlantic Ocean, formed over water, so it's maritime, it's warm, so it's going to be tropical. So maritime tropical. This map doesn't show that one that formed right here, but if it did, it's forming over land, so that would be, it's continental, but it's warm, so it would be continental tropical right here. Okay, if you're wondering about this up here, this is just even colder. It's continental, so it's going to be dry, but it's way up here in the Arctic, so it's actually called a continental Arctic. But the main ones that really affect us are these 5 that you see right here. So you just need to get used to those words: maritime polar, maritime tropical, and continental polar, and continental tropical. Okay. So now we're going to look at high pressure and low pressure. We know that high pressure means that the air is pressing down, okay? And I'm not going to go further yet. Okay, it says high pressure areas are associated with fair weather. So why is that? I was jumping ahead of myself. Okay, here we go. So the sinking motion of air in high pressure, because it is cold, so it has a low temperature and a high density, so it's pressing down, makes it very difficult for air to rise and clouds to form. So if we have high pressure air, you're not going to have clouds in the sky, because in order to have a cloud, you got to have rising air with water vapor in it, and then that has to cool down and condense and form the cloud. So if the air has high pressure, it can't do that because it's pressing down. Nothing's rising up to make the cloud. Low pressure systems, and you hear about this when you're watching the weather, he'll talk about a high pressure system or a low pressure system. So if it's low pressure, that means it has warmer temperatures, so it's rising up, and it has a lower density, so the air is rising. And when the air is rising, clouds are able to form, and then as it rises up, that water vapor cools off, and you get, condensation, and those clouds can form, and that's when we have cloudy weather. So looking at a map, you may have seen something similar to this on the weather on the news, but you can see this would be an area of high pressure. And so what that means is that it's a cooler air, and so it's pressing down, and so you're not going to have clouds here. So they're having sunny skies. So it says air sinks at a high pressure center and spreads out toward locations with low pressure, because remember, high pressure chases the low pressure. The spreading air moves slowly clockwise. Okay, then we have the low pressure air over here. And so what's that? What is happening there is that clouds are forming because it's rising up. So you're going to have cloudy skies and possibly rain. It says air circles in a low pressure system and moves upward. The motion is counterclockwise and can be quick. So here's like a weather map, so you can see this actually has the clouds on it. So this area out here They don't have any clouds on the map because it's high pressure, so the air is pressing down. This area here, low pressure, so you can see that band of clouds spiraling in that low pressure system. So, if you had a choice, would you prefer to have a day in a high pressure system or a day in a low pressure system? And it just depends on what you like as far as the weather. If it were up to me, I'd like high pressure because that means the sun's shining. Even though it's a little colder, I like the sun to shine. So think about that. If you like rain and clouds and dreary days, you might like the low pressure system, but it is going to be a little warmer in that case. Okay, so what you're going to do now is you're going to get this foldable from the front table, and you are going to follow the instructions at the bottom, and if you follow them you will do it correctly. You don't have to write anything in it. It's all about coloring it based on whether it's warm or cold, wet or dry. Okay.